Thank you very much for coming down today for what is an important announcement for all Queenslanders. I'm delighted to be joined by Paul Meyer, who is the President of the Queensland Jewish Board of Deputies, Jason Steinberg, the Vice President of the Queensland Jewish Board of Deputies, and Peter Baruch, who has his own very personal story of the Holocaust. We're honoured by your presence today, Peter. The Morrison government cares deeply about making sure Australians have access to all of history, good and bad. There's an old saying that those who don't understand their history are doomed to repeat it. Well, in the Morrison government, we feel very strongly that the story of the Holocaust is one that must be learned so that horrors like that never, ever occur again. That's why today I'm really pleased to be here with Peter and with Paul and with Jason to announce a commitment of $3.5 million towards the establishment of a Holocaust museum for Queensland. That means we'll now be like Melbourne and Sydney, with a dedicated place where every one of Queensland's school children can learn about the horrors of the Holocaust, what drove it, and what it can teach us for modern society and the need for tolerance into the future. And it means that all Queenslanders of every age can access the resources and, importantly, the personal stories of people like Peter, while we still have the privilege of doing so. Thank you very much for that. I'll hand it over now to Paul and to Jason to say a few words. Thank you.
So thank you, Senator Stoker, and please pass on our gratitude to the Minister of Education, Daniel Tehan, and also the Federal Treasurer for their support for today's announcement. So prior to today, Brisbane and Queensland sat behind Perth and Adelaide and Sydney and Melbourne because we didn't have a Holocaust museum. So today starts the journey for that in Brisbane for all Queenslanders. We hope that visitors to this museum, both young and old, both in person and online, will have an opportunity to learn about the horrors of the Holocaust and other genocides so that we can build a more tolerant and accepting Queensland. And now's the best time for this to happen because we're seeing across Queensland a rise in anti-Semitism. We're seeing it across Australia and the world. We've got right-wing anti-Semitic groups in this city who are peddling their hate. So we hope that the next generation are able to come to this museum to be able to understand how to stand up and fight for tolerance, fight against prejudice, so we can have a society that doesn't see atrocities like the Holocaust happen ever again. We've got a dozen or more Holocaust survivors still living here in this great state of Queensland, and we've invited one of them today, Peter Baruch, to share his story with you and what he feels about today's announcement. And we're just delighted that the Morrison government has come to support this initiative so every Queenslander can have access to be educated about the Holocaust. So now I'd like to invite Peter Baruch to address you.
I wish that there was no necessity for Holocaust museums. But regrettably, the Holocaust did occur, and many millions were needlessly murdered for nothing else than because of their ethnicity. Today, there are not many survivors left. Let's face it, the Holocaust was 75, 80 years ago. And many of those who are left are becoming too elderly to be able to transmit their stories to you. So the need for education today is greater than ever. It's so important that we must fight anti-Semitism, discrimination, prejudice, intolerance, hate in all their forms. And education is the key. And Holocaust museums throughout the world, and soon there's going to be one right here in Brisbane, have an important place to play in the education process. Because the lessons of the Holocaust mustn't be forgotten. I'm thrilled that the Holocaust Museum will be opening soon right here in Brisbane. It's very important. And I hope that in some small way I'll be able to be a part of it. Thank you.
Wonderfully sincere words that really do get to the heart of what we're trying to achieve here. And that is a Queensland that doesn't experience anti-Semitism, and a Queensland that is tolerant and embracing of people from all places and all walks of life. Can I acknowledge at this moment the dogged advocacy of the Queensland Jewish Board of Deputies, who have been fighting for the opportunity to share this history in more detail with Queenslanders for some time. So I take my hat off to you for the work that you've done to get this opportunity over the line. Can I acknowledge you, Peter, because though he comes here very humbly, he has personally taught thousands of Queenslanders with school visits about the significance of the Holocaust and the importance of understanding this dreadful chapter in the world's history. And can I acknowledge the passion and enthusiasm of my colleagues, Josh Frydenberg and Minister Dan Tehan, who are great supporters of this project and the capacity it has to educate so many Queenslanders in what it means to be an embracing and tolerant society. Thank you very much. Anything further? Any questions?
Where is the museum going to go?
That's a matter that's still the subject of discussion and negotiation, but it's hoped that a great location will be found somewhere accessible to all Queenslanders, hopefully in the CBD or South Bank precincts.
Is $3.5 million enough to build it, or will you be seeking funding from other places as well?
It's a darn good start, but we're always open to receiving a contribution from the state government.
And how long has the Jewish community been pushing for this museum for?
Many years, and it reflects the culmination of work from people like Peter and Paul and Jason, but also all of the Holocaust survivors from Queensland whose experiences we just don't want to lose. This is the start of the journey, and so there'll be a process of finding a location and a design, obviously wanting to make sure that it's got all of the bells and whistles of interactivity that are necessary to be able to communicate the gravity and the complexity of this message to people of all ages. That will take some time, but wonderfully, the journey starts today.
Will there be any historic items that you know of so far coming?
As I understand it, there will be a number of real objects made available for the museum, and by necessity, all of those had to come from overseas at some point.
Peter, can we hear a little bit about your story fleeing from Nazi persecution?
Well, to hear a little bit would take about an hour, but I'll try and cut it down. I was born in Lodz in Poland in 1938. And for some reason, my parents decided that we should get out of there. The rest of my wider family all stayed and all perished. We went to Lithuania, where a Japanese consul by the name of Chiune Sugihara issued us with transit visas for Japan. A transit visa allowed us to stay in Japan for 10 days, and then we had to move on. We went through Russia on the Trans-Siberian Railroad, which was up to 14 days, to Vladivostok, across the Sea of Japan, to Tsuruga, the port of humanity on the west coast of Japan. And from there to Kobe, where we stayed for the next 6 months. And when word came that Japan was entering the war, we had to move. The government had let us overstay our 10 days. And we were told we were going to America. However, by then there were over 4,000 Polish refugees in Kobe, more in Nagoya and Tokyo. And America came back and said they'd only take 500. So the British said we should approach their colonies of Canada, Australia and New Zealand. My parents managed to get visas for New Zealand, and our journey then continued through China, through Indonesia, Sydney, Australia, to Wellington, New Zealand, where I grew up.
And what do you remember? You're obviously a child or even a toddler at that time. Do you remember, what's your earliest memory?
I remember some incidents on the Trans-Siberian Railroad. I start remembering things in Japan where I had my 3rd birthday. The total journey took us 2 years. And in Japan, well, different things happened, which I won't go into now, but they did remain indelibly in my memory. Yes, well, I gave an address just recently on video, and it's available if you want to see it. It's on YouTube, I believe. And that was for an hour. So that's about how long it takes me to tell my full story.
Yeah, it's quite a journey. It still obviously makes you feel very emotional.
Yeah, it does. But I'm a happy chappy now.